Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with episode number 184 of the Yakking Show. The Yakking Show is brought to you from Ontario. And first, I must welcome Kathleen as co-host. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing in Waterloo today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much.
I've gone off script. Sorry, I've gone off script a little bit. I got to tell you that the reason for the Yakking Show is to enlighten you, to enable you, and hopefully to entertain you, but above all, to give you a new perspective for the changing world we're living in. And things are changing. And our guest is involved in some major changes today, but I don't want to steal his thunder, and it's not my job to introduce guests because Kathleen does it way better than I do. So first, over to you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you all so very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. We'd love to hear from you. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. And this one's really exciting. I can't wait to delve into this. His name is Dave Shulz. Dave, first of all, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys. So appreciate it.
Excellent. Now, you are the founder of Nextlinks. It's an indoor golfing software that blends real gameplay with cutting-edge technology, creating an exciting and fun experience for players of all skill levels. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. But first, for our audience, can you give us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in bringing golf into the digital age?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm one of those sort of stories about a person that has a corporate job and is making a good salary, but sort of feels trapped by it. Starting in 2008, I would say, so I joined the Navy when I was 17 and went through that. And then I went and got my electronic engineering degree and finished first in my class at a great school in sort of Central California, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So their motto is learn by doing. And so my whole life is sort of about learn by doing, right? That's sort of a characteristic. So I went into corporate America and I ended up being in the oil and gas and energy sector and aviation sector. And I had a lot of really big jobs, right? Global jobs, leadership jobs, but I just wasn't fulfilled. And then 2008 hit. And we got stuck with a lot of personal real estate assets as like a family. And so I just realized at that time, I'm like, wow, now I'm going to be doing this for another 10 years. And it sort of changed the way I started thinking, I also have to credit, Barack Obama, because in 2008, he gave a State of the Union speech. Somebody should look it up and watch the little part because it was when we were in like the max crisis, right? So I was feeling as sorry for myself as I could feel. And all of a sudden, the president comes on and he says, hey, you guys, wake up. The only way out of this is if everybody gives, just a little bit more. And I was like, so it's kind of like my moment where I decided at some point in my life, I was going to find, this purposeful action to take and make my mark on the world. And it turns out that golf is my common thread, right? From being a child all the way through my corporate world, the advantages that golf gave me in corporate America, all of that stuff combined. And then all of a sudden, this business model called Topgolf shows up. They've been around since 97. They were formed by a couple of brothers in England. But in 2014, they got the capital to really scale. And now there's like 70 or 80 of these things in the United States. And that creates culture change. And so now all of a sudden, I realized in about 2014, that the culture of golf was going to expand beyond the traditional golfer, right? There was going to be this new fringe audience that, sort of another ring, if you will. And then I realized the size of the ring was about 20 times bigger than the entire golf industry. And I went, oh, wow. And so I just saw their game and I said, wow, their game isn't that exciting. I'm an engineer. I solve problems, and then I came up with my idea for the game. And then I pitched it to a couple of people and I realized, wow. And that was St. Patrick's Day 2015. And I haven't really taken a minute break since then, building a new sport really for the masses to enjoy.
Wow, that is an amazing story. Amazing story. So, Dave, I played golf many years ago. I'm old now. When I was in my 30s and 40s in the corporate world, way back then, it was the thing to play golf. And I played for a good few years, never got very good. And then when my kids got into their teens, they started playing and they were easily beating me. And I gave up because that was hard to take. And I didn't have the time to put into it. But I look at, and I see golf as in a crisis, if you like, because it seems it's caught between rising real estate costs, the fascination of electronics for a lot of the younger generation, and people having less time than they did 40 years ago. So is your system, do you think it's changing golf, or is it saving golf, or is it doing both?
Well, it's creating a new product. So I spent, there's a tool, and so I'm a, like what they call a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and it's problem solving, right? So I'm a corporate problem solver. So I have a very methodical approach to how to solve problems. And I came up with a solution in like October 2015 that says that golf needs a new alternative of itself that's much more approachable, right? It solves like 9 critical problems. I read all these industry studies, and I just figured it out, and I said, wow, and that's why Topgolf is popping, right? So that helped me understand, there's this pent up audience for golf that they can't access it the way it is, but if you give it to them just a little bit sexier, and golf has such a positive quality. Those of us that have had golf in our lives that appreciate the value of it, think of it as a wellness tool, right, for ourselves. If you look at Steph Curry or Michael Jordan, I mean, these guys were on the Ryder Cup doing like an 8-minute interview saying that golf is more important to them than basketball, and always will be. 100%.
Excellent.
Very interesting.
Wow. So before, some of our audience members may not be familiar with Nextlinks. So first of all, let's start with that. What is Nextlinks, and how does your system differ from other indoor golf systems?
So Nextlinks is really still a vision if you think about product development. So Nextlinks is the vision for this sport where you play all of your full power shots into these traditional simulator screens that you're beginning to see expand into sports bars and stuff. But then at some specified distance, that's away from the cup, call it 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, whatever the venue can allow, you transition out of that simulator world into a real playing field. And the software we created connects those two experiences together. So I filed for a patent on what's called transition software from virtual play to a real world environment, and I codified that over the last 7 years. So the product that we have in the market that's proven, right? So I didn't have enough money to build that whole thing, right? I'm just my guy. I ended up with a team of 6. We were burning like 60 grand a month because we thought we had some good projects coming. This is like 3-4 years ago, and then those projects didn't manifest and we had to shrink down. But all along we've been building, I've been pivoting smaller and smaller, trying to get what you think of as the sort of the missing pieces. So the missing pieces is, how do you solve just the putting element of that? So forget the simulator, right? Everybody knows what those are. How do you solve the putting element where everything that anybody's ever seen, you have to walk around these putting holes? And so I was looking at the Topgolf model, and I said, well, the putting model has to be just like the Topgolf model from a social standpoint. So instead of that area where you're hitting the ball, that's a putting green. So now how do you pick the right size putting green? How do you turn that into 2 or 3 hours of family entertainment in that same space? And that's what we actually finished. So we opened a real project in the city of Indian Wells near Palm Springs. And the city invested about $500,000 when we were still, a laboratory incubator, just figuring it out. And they let me sort of create a beta site at their site that they commercialized, right? So they ran it. They have all the food and bev. They have all the operating teams. They did all the marketing. Well, it's turned into just a smashing success. And what we did is we showed how you can create sort of putting on a court, right? So if you think of pickleball, right, the ideal golf court is about the size of a pickleball court, right? But what we've done is we've invented the software, which is these beams of light that shine down. So the answer to how you do all that is you create interactive games. So we have like an iPad kiosk that you look at, and there's like 9 games. And the game that I like to talk about the most is the one that's most like real golf, because at the core, that's what this is all about. The others are all additional games that you can play just to have fun, right? That you're still learning how to putt. Every time you're playing our games, you're playing with a real putter, a real ball, just like you would on a real golf course, on a real putting green with real contours. So the only challenge was how to turn the electronics of that into an interactive game. And so it's an iPad screen. You pick your game. The game I like is called the Nextlinks Challenge. And the Nextlinks Challenge is a multi-level game. It's 9 putts. There's, each, you can assign whatever you want for par, but in our little game, everything's a two putt. So, even par is 18 strokes instead of 72 in traditional golf, and it's all putting. But what's fun is the way we pick the games. So we put ourselves in the mindset of a skilled golfer and on a green that's, perfect, like you're a real green. And we say, how would a golfer want their 9 different holes to be laid out on this course, right? And so the example I like to use is when I played a lot of golf, you get on the green, you got like a 15-foot birdie putt or a 10-foot birdie putt. It's generally flat. That's your first putt of the day. And as a golfer, you're like, I got to drop that in. That's going to be, that's going to affect the course of my round. And so we do that. We do that on all 9 putts. And so we created a game in 2015 that my team and I played every single day for like 2 years before this Indian Wells thing even started.
Wow.
So here we are in 22, and finally the market conditions are right for me to scale it into the market. So I didn't have enough capital to scale. So all I was focused on is adding value using my skills of being a product development specialist, right? I'm a global supply chain expert. I'm a product development expert. I've got this abundance of training that I received, in leadership and in execution. And so I've just been envisioning this big empire of this new sport, that zips past pickleball. But pickleball wasn't even here when I started my project, right? So I've watched them sort of arrive and begin to scale, and I'm thinking, when I have my time, that's going to go a lot faster.
I can see this having a tremendous market. I mean, everywhere, but especially in the cold climates during winter months, where I see it here where we are in Canada in the winter months, the indoor golfing clubs here just boom, right? Because that's right. People want to play.
It's one of the few hotspots where simulator play is actually very popular.
Absolutely.
Wow. Just I'm trying to get my head around this, and I'm sort of thinking this.
Sorry, it takes a while. Remember, I've been doing this for 7.5 years without a day.
I know, but I can really see how it would be really interesting and way more attractive than just everything simulated. So, but what size venue do you need? How many foursomes do you need to try and accommodate at the same time? Do you need a big building to put this in?
No, so that's been a big part of my process so I started out in 2015 showcasing my vision for a big building, right? A full scale building that competes with Topgolf, right? Because that's what I wanted the market to see. And I was hoping people with money were going to run over to me, right? When you're a brand new entrepreneur, you just think everybody's going to come and support you and give you money, right? So I showed this vision for the future, and then I learned over the last 7 years that nobody gets here without the grind, right?
Yeah.
But if you know that going in, which I did, you sort of just take it all in stride, right, along the way. So now we've got the products that, so when you think about product development, at the end, you have a product. So the only product that we have that's proven. So now we have a product that's ready to scale. It's a putting zone, right? So just think of it as a pickleball court. That could go in a hotel lobby. That could go in a sports bar. That's about $100,000 project if you do it first class.
Right.
But I've, over the course of the 7 years, I've developed the whole content from large scale venue vision with the connected game all the way down to delivered product in the form of this putting only experience. And the putting only experience is what the market is hungry for right now. So I'm thinking of all kinds of ways to bring that to market right now, Peter. It's getting really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I got it. So, who are you going to target? Traditional golfers, and as Kathleen says, up here in the northern cold parts, I'm sure traditional golfers would jump at this. Or is this going to attract a whole lot of new people who come at it more from the virtual reality, digital game side of things?
Yeah, both, 100% both, right? So that's the whole key. Is if you look at the Topgolf model, right? It's they've got the social perfect. Their food and bev is awesome. Their catering. This is all about special events, right? That's how these venues make their money. Yeah. so they've just figured out, that model really well. And, so we're just, I'm just kind of paging onto that.
Excellent. Very good.
So Dave, how are you going about marketing this at this stage?
So I didn't assign any marketing budget for myself, right? So I relied on experience. So I started in 2015 reading all kinds of books about success, right? Because I had this big vision. I see this big empire in the future, and I'm not willing to settle for anything less, right? Because I think the world deserves it, not because I want to go get a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. And so I read these books, and they told me how I should behave and how I should act. And then I read a book by Seth Godin called Tribes. And Seth Godin goes on to tell people, hey, you don't need to be AT&T or Topgolf, in my case, to bring the audience to you. You can build your own tribe. And so I chose LinkedIn because I already had a network of global business people that thought of me as a real business person, right? And here I am at 50 years old, just quitting my job in a minute and literally telling everybody I'm going to go change the future of golf. I'm going to sort of assume a leadership role and I'm going to deliver products, right? So everybody thought I was a little bit off the rocker. And when I reflect, I was, right? So when I think back, but to answer your question, I've posted a post every single day for about 7.5 years. It's one of my habits.
Wow.
So I just chose one platform. I built an audience underneath it that appreciates the work I'm doing. And now as the market is arriving and people are beginning to pay attention to golf, all that value is sort of paying off. So.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Are you, out of curiosity, are you communicating with a lot of golf clubs around North America? Yes.
Yeah. So the National Golf Course Owners Association, right? So that was remember at the beginning, I was thinking about marketing a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So I settled on the National Golf Course Owners Association, and their CEO is a guy named Jay Karen, and he's a friend of mine. I spent about $250,000 at their launch party in February of 2015. So trade shows has been another, I've put in some real money into trade shows.
Sure.
And so I went and spent a bunch of money like everybody does when they're starting their business to try and get attention, right? So I spent about $250,000 at his show in San Diego in February 2016. He was the incoming CEO, and I was sitting in the audience with like 200, 300 golf course executives and owners. And that's my audience, right? I see these things going into clubs already. That was my conclusion. And Jay gets up there and starts preaching basically my business case for the future. Hey, let's do something different, right? And every word he said just resonated with me. So I'm just sitting there shaking my head the whole time. And so I've watched him, for 7 years as CEO of the NGCOA, and I'm really impressed. That guy, he's a good leader. He knows what he's doing. And so, yeah, I've built relationships. Kathleen is a big part of my process.
Absolutely, I agree with you. In business, it's all about the relationships.
Yeah,
yeah.
But Dave, as a former golfer, and I haven't touched a golf club for years, and I'm sure for many of our audience around the world who are not that closely involved with golf, until I read some of the background you gave me before the show, I had very little, and I didn't really understand what the controversy was between the new league, LIV, and the PGA. And as Kathleen mentioned right as we started off, it's hit the news again with a court case. But could you give our audience a little bit of a background and your thoughts on what's going on in professional golf?
Yeah, I mean, this is the ultimate making a mountain out of a molehill, right? So this is trying to prevent emerging competition on the part of the leadership of the PGA Tour, and basically assigning this new entity as a bad actor, right? As an evil, no good group. And the reality is that they started their company in 2018. We introduced golf to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Aramco is the big oil company over there. In the 40s, our American executives working over there hand in hand with them were introducing them to golf by mixing oil and sand together and creating greens. And so they've developed a real passion and a love for the game, and they wanted to get into the game, and they approached all the right people. They started with Tiger. You see in the news how Tiger passed up 700 or 800 million. Well, that was early in the process. So people don't read all of the content often. And so that was when they were first realizing that, hey, golf needs to spread the golf professional farther around the globe. And the golf professional is central to the US market. What I didn't know back then was that the actual PGA Tour commissioner, like think of it as yourself, Peter. Mm-hmm. You have absolute authority over every one of your members to say whether or not they can participate in anything outside of the badge, if you will, right? So if I like you, I can let you have special favors. And if I don't like you, I can, even though you're a great golfer, I can punish you. That's my right. That's in the laws of the PGA Tour law books. Right. The other one is you can't be on TV playing golf without permission from Peter, the commissioner.
Okay.
Those two those two membership rules have been on the books for 92 years.
Wow.
And yeah, and between 1990, so when this all came up, by the way, until 6 months ago, I had ultimate supreme faith in the leadership of the PGA Tour, right? You believe what you're told, and mm-hmm. Everything seems right. Everybody seems happy. So I'm not a guy that's against the PGA Tour. I'm just observing what's going on because, sometimes you have to just face the truth, which is these guys went after this emerging competition and they're still doing it, just trying to shut them down. Mm-hmm. Because it's their only plan, and it just doesn't fit with who they are as a company. So when you hear about companies that get away from their purpose, right? So the purpose of the PGA Tour, I bet you, I've been thinking about it a lot. So by showcasing golf, by showcasing the world's best golfers, we engage, we inspire, and have a positive impact on our fans, on our partners, and our communities worldwide. Mm-hmm. That's the mission of the PGA Tour. And then the PGA Tour created a game plan that said, wow, this new emerging competition that's actually really good for that mission statement, we don't want it to happen because we don't own it. and
yeah.
So we want to squash it so that we can do it ourselves later, right? And own it ourselves. So and honestly, what everybody, so I've educated myself, right, a lot. So when the bells and whistles started going off in my head, like, what's going on? Why is my tour that I've loved my whole life all of a sudden turning players against players and fans against players and fans against fans? I'm like, that just doesn't make sense. And so that's when I went and really studied what happened and the history of it. And so now I know. And it all of the power lies just with the commissioner. So right. the players have 4 sort of shares of the power. The other business members have 4 sort of shares of the power. And the commissioner is the tiebreaker. And for 92 years, the commissioner plus the 4 business people vote as a pack.
Right.
So
right.
Players don't have any power.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
I've got a feeling something on a smaller scale happened 30, 40 years ago. I lived most of my life in Africa, and I lived in South Africa for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And a hotel magnate called Sol Kersner started a company called Southern Sun Hotels, and then he started Sun International. And I believe he started the world's most lucrative golf tournament at Sun City. It was the first tournament to offer $1 million prize for the winner. And he invited, was it 12 or 18 international golfers? And I think he got a lot of flack from the PGA right at the start. And I seem to remember they tried to prevent that happening. But it was widely broadcast on TV to an international audience, and he got away with it. And it eventually became a very regular and popular tournament. And I think it expanded to other courses in South Africa. I don't know if it's still going, but I seem to remember that the establishment didn't like that at the time. Do you remember that?
So the memories are coming back to me, right? Yeah. So I was actually in college from like 90 to 95.
Right.
I had kids. Remember, I went in the Navy first, right? So all of a sudden, I remember all this talk about this world tour and I remember as a fan being excited about it. And then I remember hearing the politics. And so remember, this was a 4-year. I remember saying, "Oh wow, the PGA Tour is going to have to change their rules." That's what I remember saying. because all this stuff was explained in 94, because it was a 4-year investigation by our Federal Trade Commission that got shut down by the politics, right? Hey, don't look over here. Don't look over here. You got more important things to worry about. And then we paid lobbyists to send that message. And you know the powerful people that are involved in golf, don't. Yeah. And back then it was more arguable that there wasn't enough players, right? Yep. So the key premise, the key difference between today and then is back then, I remember thinking, wow, this could really do harm to golf because there aren't enough great players. Right. Today, as a golf fan, there isn't enough access to the great players.
Right. That's right. They can't get an opportunity to play. Correct. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a different problem, supply and demand.
Sure. Kathleen, back to you.
So, Dave, how is your business structured? Do you see this as a franchise going forward?
So I told you, I don't see it as a franchise. I'm doing business with honest people that have money and have opportunities and locations that want to help, that want to bring our work into their place. So over the course of all this, we've now shut everything down. So I told you we have a product. Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't, about January, I was really pushing to get capitalized and the money just wasn't there. And so rather than continue to burn resources, all of my team is on furlough, right? I'm just kind of organizing to scale, and my key is getting the right partners, right? So now I have, multiple projects coming forward. There's a project in Dubai we're working on. I just got word that there's a project in Washington that's funded. All of a sudden, all my, you plant seeds every day for 7.5 years, and when it rains, it rains. And so all those, I don't really need to market now because the industry and the market is now recognizing the body of work, and they trust me, right? So back to philosophy, right? You have to watch Simon Sinek's video if you never have. Start with why. Right?
Yep, very good.
Yeah, it's like a 15-minute video, and it really just explains that consumers buy things because they trust the company that's providing them. They trust their purpose, right? So if you believe the PGA Tour is doing good, right, like their mission says, it doesn't matter what product they put on the table, you're going to want to buy it, right? So that's what I've been doing, is creating that core center of purposeful intent, and a vision for a company, and waiting for the right people. So I've sort of been whale hunting, right, as I've been pivoting, and the whales have arrived.
The whales have arrived.
So, yeah.
I got normally on these shows we have a burning question. Number 8 is the burning question, and I'm going to change it around a little bit for you. And this wasn't in the list that we were going to ask you. It's just hearing you talk. You started with a vision many years ago. You were highly successful in several careers before that, and you've just listening to you've overcome obstacles and got around corners and just pushed this project for so long to success. And you've talked about problem solving. So if you were advising a young 20 or 30-year-old who wants to leave the corporate world, or who doesn't know what he wants to do, but he has a vision, what do you think is the biggest characteristic you've had or personality trait that's got you to where you are today? How would you advise that young person?
I would tell them my story, which is I got connected to this out of some universal energy, right? So I was playing, I knew I was looking for it from 8 until 15, right? So I ended up having my idea in 15, and I was thinking about it since 2008, right? So be patient, I guess, would be number one.
Yeah.
But once I was attracted to this idea, I couldn't get it out of my brain. And I thought, wow, if I apply all my life skills, I'll be able to do this better than anybody else, because not only am I good at it, but I care about it, right? So it's what I would remember. My problem is I couldn't retire early enough because I wasn't gonna have my retirement savings got wiped out. So
yeah,
you look at a guy like Vince Scully, right, who we just lost, who was a broadcaster till he was 88, and then he just died at like 92 or 94. Got to spend some really quality time with his family in the years in between, but he loved what he did so much. That wasn't a job for him. So you have to find something like that. And there's a book. So what's cool about my story is I just did it, right? I knew I had the skills. I studied the market. I knew that the conditions of today were going to arrive. I just knew it. And so I just started going through my process. I filed for the patent, but then as I was getting closer to quitting my corporate job, I was still doing all that stuff, right? I filed for the patent while I was in my corporate job. And then I told my boss shortly after, and I told my boss because of the real answer I'm going to give you is as I was reading everybody's stories about success, one of these guys said, "Hey, I've never met anybody that's really successful, right, at the level of success I'm trying to achieve. But it's really anybody's success. I've never really met anybody that's uber successful that hasn't read this book that was published in 1937 from Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich."
Think and Grow Rich.
Right.
And so the minute I read that, I'm like, well, crap, I want to be uber successful. And I haven't read that book. I haven't even heard of it, right? I'm 50 years old. I don't even know that book exists. So I run to the bookstore, immediately, find the book on the shelf because it turns out it's one of the most popular references for success in the history of the world.
Yep.
And I start reading it, and it starts talking about dreaming and sleeping on ideas. And I'm like, oh, this is nonsense, right? Chapter 1. And then as I'm going through it, it starts reminding me of what I've actually been doing sort of subconsciously, right? Going through my own process.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get to chapter 6, and it goes, oh, by the way, if you already had your idea, you can forget everything you read in chapter 1 through chapter 6. And I'm like, oh, thank God, right? I mean, I can remember this stuff like it's yesterday. And then I keep reading it, and I'm like halfway, 2/3 of the way through the book, and I'm like, oh my God, that's literally what I just did for the last 6 or 9 months.
Yeah.
So what that did for me is it created faith that the rest of that book must be legitimate. It must
Right.
have value.
Right.
So what I did is I looked at all the things I didn't know yet, right, in that book about, how to succeed. So what I did is I actually shaped my entire set of characteristics for the last 7 years around 31 rules of failure. So this guy studied like 10,000 failures during our sort of highest growth period. And he boiled it down to 31 common reasons for failure. And so as a scientist, right, me going into an experiment where I'm going to risk my life, I'm like, okay, if my theory is that if I do the opposite of each one of those 31 things, or I do what's supposed to happen to not fail, then it's a given that at some point I will succeed. And so a lot of those are kind of human character things, integrity, values. And so moral of the story is you have to have a lot of character to succeed. You have to be willing to do hard things. And so I had about a $250,000 a year job. And as soon as I got done reading that book, I called my boss, who was remote. I was the leader of my shop, and all anybody really saw was my numbers. But I knew for the last 6 months, I'd really just been spending a lot of time on this idea. And I knew at that moment that this was my life. But I was nowhere ready to quit my job at all, right? But I had to call my boss and tell him that I'm no longer really doing my job, right? So I immediately picked up the phone, said, boss, I'm not able to focus on my job anymore, but if I have to quit right now, it's going to cause extreme pain.
Yep.
He gave me another 9 months before he asked me to quit. He said, you know what, just make sure your numbers are coming in, make sure you're communicating with your team. So I also had to tell my entire team that essentially, I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'm still getting paid. The beauty is I just spent the previous 2 years building a team that knows how to run their own business, because when I arrived, they wouldn't do anything without asking permission because, sorry, I'm going to stop right after this because this is really important. I grew up military, right? So the way people run businesses, command and control, right? It's the way business has been run for most of our lives.
That's right.
Today's workforce is not interested in command and control.
No.
So I started adopting Empower and Entrust as a method for my leadership with my team in LA that I ran the shop. And so when I arrived, they wouldn't do anything. They were afraid of their shadow. And I started challenging them to take risks. And I said, look, the only way you're going to get in trouble from me is if you take a risk and it goes the wrong way, you just don't explain what you were thinking, right? What were all your decisions that you made that caused this to happen, right? And then did you learn from it, and did you move on? So over the period of my team, really, and we really bonded, right? Because all of a sudden they felt empowered, they liked their job better. So they gave me about 9 months of runway as well. So the real answer is go buy the book and believe it, because everything it says is 1,000% accurate.
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That was
Yes.
really good. And that book is on that bookshelf, one of those bookshelves behind me.
On my bookshelf, yes.
I took a lot of your time there. So let me go back to Kathleen quickly. She needs to ask you how people can get you.
Yes. Yes, we're running low on time, unfortunately, Dave. So tell our audience how they can contact you.
Well, we sort of covered it during the thing, right? So I adopted LinkedIn as a platform. Because I was already a global business leader, and I already had, relationships all over the world. And I read this book from Seth Godin called Tribes, right? So everything about me is on LinkedIn for the last 7.5 years. I mean, I've got articles on there. So if you want to know what's happening in the world of Dave Shulz and Nextlinks, just connect with me on LinkedIn, and you'll have a live feed.
Fabulous.
Excellent. Thank you. And for audio listeners, that will be in the description. Dave's LinkedIn connection is in the description. Thank you, Dave.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all once again for tuning into our show. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.